Hello and welcome to our new show, Mildly Interesting Deep Dives, where we'll delve deeper than our traditional news episodes into some of the most important topics in current discourse. Today, we ask ourselves, defunding the police or reforming it? As always, if you like what we do, subscribe to our YouTube channel and Spotify account, follow us on all the socials, and keep up with our articles over at our website. All of the links will be in the description of wherever you're listening from. Now, without further ado, I'm John Sanch.
And I'm Akash Lush.
And this is Mildly Interesting.
Mildly interesting. No, seriously, just mildly interesting.
On May the 26th, 2020, the world went into absolute chaos at the sight of a viral social media video where a black American by the name of George Floyd was murdered in cold blood in the streets of Minneapolis by white police officers. The main perpetrator has since been sentenced to 22 years and 6 months in jail. At the time of the arrest, while the streets were flooded with people advocated against unfair police brutality, several slogans began to emerge, of which the famous "Defund the Police" was one of the most important. The pressure from this rallying cry actually forced certain lawmakers' hands into cutting police funds and reinvesting the money in services relating to housing, mental health, food access, and others. In total, 20 major cities, including New York and Los Angeles, reduced their police budgets in one form or another. Another black man by the name of Patrick Lyoya, who came to the US fleeing violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 2014, was shot in the back of the head in Michigan while being pinned down against the ground. This puts into question everything that has been done in the last 2 years since George Floyd's death, and thus puts into question the whole efficacy of defunding the police. We will put a link in the description to Mr. Lyoya's death, but be advised that this is a very, very hard watch. Akash, have you seen the video of Patrick Lyoya?
I have.
What do you think of it?
It's important to note that the footage released by the Grand Rapids Police Department is a collection of footage from the body cameras of the police, the surveillance footage from, I think, across the street, and sort of a video taken on a cell phone. The reason that this is because the body camera from the police officer in question was actually turned off prior to the altercation, which immediately is suspicious. I haven't worked with the exact type of body cameras they use, but reading the descriptions or the statements later given by the chief of police, I realized that the body cameras that I have used and that this policeman has used are very similar, in which you have to press and hold down a button for 3 to 4 seconds in order for it to turn on or turn off. And obviously, it is in question whether this was done on purpose or if this could have been done accidentally. But, and this is my personal opinion, having worked with body cameras similar to this model before, there's no way you can do it on accident. They're designed to be done intentionally and not accidentally, because imagine if you're in the middle of like a tense situation and then it accidentally turns off. Obviously now you have like no evidence of the interaction. It immediately striked me off. It was very suspicious to me that the body camera was turned off before the altercation happened. But essentially what we see is that Lyoya was pulled over because he was driving a car with mixed plates. I believe that was the issue. He got out the car. He was told to stay in the car, so immediately the police officer got jumpy. He kept asking for a license. He asked if Lyoya actually spoke English, I think, at one point. Lyoya proceeded to ask someone in the passenger seat to get his license. From the footage, it appears that the passenger did not know where the license was, and this soon sort of escalated into Lyoya sort of running away from the scene and the police officer chasing after him. So then there was a physical altercation where Lyoya seemed to have his hands on the taser that the police officer was brandishing. This is where it gets a bit tricky because obviously we have no body cam footage. But the police officer was shouting at Lyoya to let go of the taser repeatedly, and then the person in the passenger seat of Lyoya's car seemed to shout at one point that Lyoya didn't have his hands on the taser at all. That being said, Lyoya was pushed to the ground, and he was face down. He was face down in the ground. The policeman was on top of him, so he was essentially pinned to the ground face down. Lyoya was still struggling, and that is when the policeman decided to take out his gun and shoot him point blank in the head. It is a very disturbing collection of videos. And you know it's bad when the police commissioner himself refused to state whether he felt the shooting was justified or not, but he did mention that he said that he viewed the shooting as very tragic, and the whole scene to him was, in direct quotations, a progression of sadness.
No matter how resistant, and I mean this resistance in the form of running away, it doesn't give you the right to shoot them in the back of the head. This was not a murderer. This was not a assassin for hire. This was someone who was alleged to be driving in a car from which license plate did not correspond to. That's all there was to it. And, if you can tackle them to the ground and, arrest them and whatnot, and perhaps even use the taser, using the guidelines, by the way, because the taser was not being used according to the guidelines because it's supposed to be used from a distance and not point blank. But even if you have to use the taser according to the guidelines, fair enough. But an altercation like this does not give you the right, by any chance of the imagination, to shoot someone in the back of the head, cold blood, no questions asked. So, ever since the slogan of defunding the police, many people have voiced their opinions on the slogan's inherent consequences. But Akash, what do you think of defunding the police as a maxim on how to deal with these sorts of issues?
It's interesting to me because I think first it's important to lay out that defund the police means different things to different people. While in all the message is sort of the same, spend less money on police, spend more on community initiatives, the exact sort of outline of defunding the police is different across the board. So for some, defund the police is a sort of a movement, sort of a stepping stone towards abolishing police departments entirely. For others, the idea of defunding the police is limited to simply restricting money for military-style equipment.
Do you stand on any of those sides?
I think I'm more towards the latter, the idea that sort of restricting money for military-style equipment. For many, the definition sort of lies somewhere in the middle, that there should be police, but their role in communities should be limited to crime sort of prevention. The idea goes that service agencies other than police could and should be responsible to non-violent issues or sort of respond to non-violent calls related to mental health, housing, and other issues. In Berkeley, California, they have moved to even create a whole separate department to handle routine traffic violations instead of the actual police force. This is kind of what defund the police. When you say defund the police, this is what it means in general. It kind of means divesting resources to make specific forces for non-violent crimes or non-violent measures, and the police force is restricted to stuff like murders, homicides, shootings, like terrorism, because currently the system that America has in place, every crime is responded by the same force, your local police department. And while to some that may make sense, police stop crime, so police should be responsible for all types of crime. What we're seeing with Lyoya and what we saw with George Floyd almost 2 years ago is the fact that for some reason putting police in charge of non-violent crimes still ends up in violence. And sometimes it even ends up in casualties. And sadly speaking, statistics show that ethnic minorities are the most likely to be in those situations, especially the Black and Latino communities. So, where I stand personally is I don't believe abolishing the idea of policing entirely is the best option. However, spending money on military style equipment, making the police involved in every crime, responding to every crime the exact same, you can't be able to just turn off your body camera while you're dealing with a criminal. So I do believe that funds should be slowly moved away from the idea of police, away from the idea of punishment is its own deterrent, and instead moved towards community-based initiatives, crime preventive initiatives, such as, housing, economic financial support for those that are vulnerable, I suppose. I would say gun reform, but that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, essentially, the defund police is a very wide spectrum of policies, but many believe it just means divesting resources from the police and creating basically separate departments to help with community intervention as well as dealing with the punishment of non-violent crimes.
See, I don't necessarily agree with everything that you said. I agree that you should divert funds from military grade equipment. I think you should divert funds to the creation of community style departments that help with community style problems such as mental health, for instance, right? But I don't think that has to be at the cost of police budgets. I don't think you should decrease police budgets in the first place to begin with. I think that police budgets, if anything, should be increased, but just used in a different way. Because the way Defund the Police has acted on policy to do with police, like we said, funds were diverted from police budgets to housing and mental health and whatnot. And that's all good and dandy, but the problem is you're still taking money away from the budget of police force. And unsurprisingly, when the police budgets are cut, violence and injuries increase. In fact, violent crime and murder rate data from 2021 suggests a 5% increase since 2020 and over a 30% increase since 2019, which can and is often attributed to the lack of resources in police departments. Police departments don't become less racist because less resources are attributed to it. Now, there are less officers being recruited, which sure you can argue is part of the problem, but the problem isn't necessarily, I think anyway, the number of police officers. The problem is those police officers that have these, completely backwards ideals. So when you defund the police in the sense of taking money away from the police, you're actually just hurting everything else that surrounds it. What I think should happen is not defunding the police, perhaps even increase police funds, but reforming the police completely. And like you said, also increasing funds towards other ventures, other departments that deal with more community-style problems.
I think you touched on a good point there, where just simply defunding the police isn't a good solution. Police budgets sometimes shrinks after recessions as jobs disappear and tax dollars dwindle and federal funding is redirected. And to add on to what you've said, the Marshall Project reported that in June 2020, community trust eroded and there were more complaints about officer use of force when police budgets were cut in Memphis and Chicago after the Great Recession. So there is a talk to be had that simply just cutting funds to police or lessening the manpower doesn't necessarily solve the excessive force issue. I think there is a good argument to be made that increased funding in certain other areas of the police would vastly help how they perform in these sort of situations. Because we're talking about increased funds for training programs such as mental health interventions, or maybe the emphasis of the use of non-lethal force in order to incapacitate people. the idea of sort of, I'm blanking on the training they give to like people to be aware about racial differences. But training such as that, because again, studies upon studies show that not only ethnic minorities but immigrants in general are more likely to be the victims of crime and police brutality. I guess it's the whole that's why we're making this episode. It's the question between defunding the police or reforming it. And I think it's sort of like a Venn diagram with where people stand between these two issues, and that there is a common middle ground where that more money should be put into like interventions in order to essentially not solve crime, but essentially like tackle why people go into crime in the first place. I believe there is a famous example in America of not only defunding but reforming the police in order to reduce crime. Have you heard about the Santos? The Camden, New Jersey.
I've not, no. What is it?
So Camden, New Jersey often comes up as an example of a city that reframed its approach to policing and reducing crime. In sort of, I guess in support of your argument, it actually spent more money in order to do so. So what Camden did was it disbanded its police force in 2013 after one of the city's most violent years on record. Camden County then took over and in May 2013 formed a new department, the Camden County Police Department, to patrol the city. So it may seem like they just removed their police and then replaced it with a new one. But what was different was the CCPD instituted sort of community-based policing tactics along with new technology such as video observation platforms covering 6-block radiuses. And because of this change from punishment-based deterrence to crime and instead sort of community-based preemptive initiatives and remote-based police work, so like like more cameras installed, overall crime per 100,000, and the report used Camdenites as the term for Camdens and people who lived in Camden, New Jersey, but that word sounds weird to me. So overall crime per 100,000 people decreased by more than half between 2012 and 2020, and according to CCPD data, the number of shooting homicides fell by 68%. Now, research published in late 2019 in Preventive Medicine Reports also associates the new policing tactics in Camden with lower rates of gunshot patients at a major regional trauma center. So the ways in which police there actively engaged with the community work. Crime did go down in the city, but Camden is still a very poor and distressed community, so the root causes that increase crime are still there. As I think this goes worldwide. Like, if your police force is more based on punitive, like punishment, rather than reform, or like rather than preemptive intervention, the root causes are still there. The root causes of crime are repeatedly shown to be poverty, poor education, poor housing, just a lack of social and financial resources. So if you attack it from that angle, it's been demonstrated time and time again as an effective way to reduce crime. So I think from what you've said, and from the points that Defund the Police have brought up, Camden almost sounds as like the point in the middle of that Venn diagram, where there wasn't necessarily an abolishment of police altogether. There wasn't sort of less spending on policing. It was actually more spending on policing, but then you had all these sort of other initiatives and sort of task force that weren't based on punishment, they were based on prevention of crime.
You don't need to send a police officer with a shotgun to someone who's depressed or to a cat who's in a tree.
Yeah. I think when people talk about abolishing the police and defunding the police, obviously you're going to get a lot of backlash because, oh, if there were no police, they would, like, who would be there to stop crime? But I think what everyone needs to come together to realize is that stopping crime means tackling it from its roots. Obviously, you still need someone there to punish people who did wrong, right? What are your thoughts on it? Because obviously you have some people who argue that, like, you can't stop crime entirely. So what's the point, you know? We can only just try our best.
I think this is sort of away from the issue of police brutality and reforming the police, because solving social inequalities between, people of different races and ethnicities and whatnot, that's a whole different problem of itself. And I think anyone would agree that solving those problems that are at the root of crime, in a sense, would be very much helpful. So I agree with it. You should definitely try to solve those inequalities, but that's not the point here. The point here is that, and to the credit of those people who jokingly say, well, if you have no police, then no one can stop crime. That's true, but the problem is training and accountability. Like, making sure that the bad apples are actually punished for their misconduct is probably one of the best ways of dealing with this. For instance, the police officer who killed George Floyd had a record of at least 17 misconduct complaints over 19 years. Yet he was allowed to train new recruits after that. That should not happen, ever. Someone who repeatedly shows that they're not capable of, enforcing the law as a police officer in the way that it should be done, should not be allowed to train new recruits or even be in that position whatsoever. The training itself almost indoctrinates young police officers into the use of force. Like, police officer training, in general, now spends over 110 hours on self-defense and firearm skills, and only 16 hours put together on policing strategies and conflict management. Most of the crime that exists is not violent. And it's not like someone who steals a car once or is driving a car with a license plate that is not associated with the car. It's not like they will go out and just kill 25 people in the next 20 minutes. We hope you enjoyed that deep dive into the question of defunding the police or reforming it. If you have something you want us to dive deep into, do let us know in the comments, by messaging us on social media, or by emailing us. If you did enjoy it, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels, follow us on all the socials, and check out the articles in our website, links for which will be in the description. Without further ado, I've been João Santos.
And I've been Akash Lush.
And this was Mildly Interesting Deep Dives.
Mildly interesting. No, seriously, just mildly interesting.